remembered as one of the nation's greatest heroes. Instead, his name would become synonymous with treason in the United States. But why would Benedict Arnold, a man who had risked his life for the revolution, betray the cause? Was it because of a woman, for money and glory, or was he driven by other motivations? Welcome to History is Criminal. I'm your host, Mick Biddick, and with me is my lovely, talented co host and wife, the unqualified and unapologetic Kimberly. Are you ready for the story of treason, love, and revolution?
Ooh, treason, love, and revolution. That's just a regular Tuesday in our house. Let's do this. I've got my sass loaded and my snacks ready. Let's dig into the dirty past again.
Born in Norwich, Connecticut on the 14th of January, 1741, he was the great grandson of Benedict Arnold I, an early governor of the Rhode Island colony. He was the fourth member of his family to bear the name of his great grandfather, including an older brother who died in infancy. That's kind of weird to name your son after your dead son, but
Yeah, that is kind of strange.
of his five siblings, only his sister Hannah would join him to survive into adulthood. On his mother's side of the family, they were related to John Lothrop, whose family would count six American presidents among their descendants: Millard Fillmore, James Garfield, Ulysses Grant, Franklin Roosevelt, and both Bushes, in addition to Joseph Smith, founder of the Church of Latter day Saints, and a host of governors and senators, poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, J.P. Morgan, the banker's banker of the Gilded Age, and serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. In short, he had a lot of family ties.
Some of those family ties I wouldn't want in my family.
I'm not sure if you're talking about Dahmer or some of the other ones in there. His father, Benedict III, was a successful businessman, but when yellow fever took the lives of the majority of his children, he slipped into depression marked by heavy drinking. During this period, young Benedict tried to enlist in the Connecticut militia at age 14 to serve in the French and Indian War, or what's known overseas as the Seven Years' War. His mother refused to allow him to enlist, but 2 years later, he was finally able to enlist. His regiment marched off towards New York to save the besieged Fort William Henry. But when news reached him of the atrocities committed by the French after their victory, and the word of a humiliating defeat reached his regiment, they turned around and went back home. He served a total of 13 days in the Seven Years' War. Later, it was be said that he deserted, but this is probably just a rumor attempted to discredit him after his later betrayal. His mother passed away in 1759, causing his father's alcoholism to worsen. By this time, most of the family's money was gone, and the 18-year-old Benedict took responsibility for caring for his father and his sister. The elder Benedict was arrested multiple times for public drunkenness and was even refused communion by his church. So apparently, at his church, when you really need some help, that's when they say no.
Yeah, not very nice church.
Yeah. He died in 1761. It was the Lathrop part of the family that came to his rescue. They set the younger Benedict up with an apprenticeship that allowed him to start his own business in 1782 as a bookseller and pharmacist in New Haven, Connecticut. It seems he had a natural knack for business, and within a year, he was able to fully repay the Lathrops and expanded his business to include trading ships. Arnold himself often captained the ships as they went on trading expeditions to the Caribbean. Rumor has it that one time on these voyages, he actually fought a duel with an English sea captain. The English captain is said to have insulted him, calling him a damned Yankee, and stating that he lacked the manners of a gentleman. The English captain was injured in the exchange of gunfire, but apologized when Arnold reloaded and threatened to kill the man. Now, most historians believe this story is probably an exaggeration, if not totally fabricated. What was unquestionable, Benedict Arnold was getting rich off the trade with the islands. At the end of the Seven Years' War, Britain found the need to start asserting control over the colony's economies. So, warning history lesson. Passage of the Sugar Act in 1764 and the Stamp Act in 1765 took a toll on the mercantile wealth flowing into the pockets of colonial merchants like Benedict Arnold. He joined the choir of voices calling for the repeal of the Stamp Acts. It is reported that he joined the Sons of Liberty, a group including Sam Adams and John Hancock among its members, a secret organization formed to resist the acts passed by Parliament that aimed to exert control over the colonies. The Sons of Liberty and other groups were not above the use of violence to get their message across. By 1770, New England was a hotbed of radical ideas centering on the concept that Parliament had no authority to levy taxes on the American colonies. The 29-year-old Benedict Arnold was in the middle of that conflict.
So basically, Benedict went from business is booming to burn it all down real quick. Nothing like messing with a man's money to spark a revolution. Such a guy thing to do.
As I've always told my students, you want to piss people off? Mess with their money or their religion.
That's right.
But not everything was revolution of business for Benedict. In 1767, he married Margaret Mansfield, and the next year he had a son, of course named Benedict. Two more sons followed, Richard and Henry. His father in law, like Benedict, was a Freemason and sheriff, and it was in that latter role that he was able to shield Benedict Arnold from his creditors, helping him amass a nice chunk of money. On March 5th, 1770, pretty important date in American history, it being the Boston Massacre, Arnold was on business in the West Indies when the news of the Boston Massacre reached him. The killing of American civilians at the hands of British soldiers shocked him. He wrote, "Good God, are the Americans all asleep and tamely giving up their liberties, or are they all turned to philosophers that they don't take immediate vengeance on such miscreants?"
If only Benedict could see us now, still fighting for liberty, still shocked by violence, and still wondering if everyone's asleep at the wheel or just too busy philosophizing on social media. History may not repeat itself exactly, but wow, does it know how to rhyme?
Mhm. As the war started, Benedict was a captain in the Massachusetts militia, a position that was elected as was the custom in New England militias. After the battles of Lexington and Concord, his regiment marched north to take part in the siege of Boston. Then he floated a plan to capture Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York. It was well known that the fort was lightly defended. He was promoted to a colonel and rode off to join Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys to capture the fort. The surprise attack on the fort was an overwhelming success, and he quickly followed that up with other victories. When a detachment of Connecticut militia arrived at Fort Ticonderoga, a dispute erupted between Arnold and the detachment's commander over who should actually take command of the fort. In an act that would foreshadow his later career, he resigned his commission with the Massachusetts militia. It was on his return trip home that he learned Margaret, his wife, had died in June. Arnold helped encourage the Second Continental Congress to launch an invasion of Quebec. Congress approved the plan but passed Arnold up for command of the expedition. Disappointed but not finished, he headed to meet with George Washington. He convinced Washington to launch a second attack on Quebec using an approach from the woods of Maine. Now commissioned in the Continental Army, his forces met up with a smaller American force and assaulted Quebec. Arnold's leg was shattered in the attack, and he was carried to a makeshift field hospital. Despite the wound, he maintained the siege of the city until he was replaced with General David Wooster. Promoted to brigadier general, he held the city but was forced to retreat when faced with a superior British force. He would also fight the British in a naval battle, throwing together ships in his own makeshift fleet on Lake Champlain. He moved to take on the British at the Battle of Valcour Island. While technically defeated, his actions and valor were credited with delaying the British advance on Ticonderoga until 1777.
I mean, that resume for a guy whose name now lives in the shady alley of American insults. Dang, Benedict really said, I'll just be out here earning medals and shattering limbs for the cause before becoming the plot twist of the revolution.
Personal ambition and jealousy nearly crippled the Continental Army. The amount of backstabbing, personal attacks in Congress was more like a telenovela than a functioning government. No one was immune, not George Washington, and certainly not Benedict Arnold. His list of friends and enemies grew in both Congress and the Army itself. One enemy, John Brown, published a handbill stating that, quote, money is the man's God, and to get enough, he would sacrifice his country.
And there it is, the drama, narcissism, and dysfunction that would shape a nation. Honestly, this wasn't a revolution. It was the first episode of Real Colonists of Congress. Pass the tea, this one's hot.
His leg was wounded the second time when he led troops to drive the British out of Danbury, Connecticut. Following the battle, he continued on to Philadelphia to confront Congress about his rank. He was able to get promoted to Major General, but was not given seniority over those who'd been appointed ahead of him. Insulted by what he saw as a slight, he wrote a letter of resignation and submitted it to George Washington. With the news of the capture of Ticonderoga by the British, Washington was in no mood to play petty games, and instead of accepting Benedict's resignation, he ordered him to head north and mount the defense against the advancing British. On October 1777, the battles of Saratoga would prove to be a turning point of the American Revolution. Here, Arnold would have become the stuff of legends, if not for his later actions. Using cunning, he convinced the British he had superior forces and they abandoned their position at Fort Stanwix. Then he joined up with General Horatio Gates at Saratoga, despite being removed from the field, in other words, told to get out of here, go back. Arnold led an attack on the British defenses. Once again, he was wounded in his left leg. Many credit his actions with turning the tide of the battle in the Americans' favor. This attack proved critical, causing the British to surrender their invading army 10 days later. His leg, heavily damaged so bad that field doctors wanted to amputate. Arnold refused amputation, and a botched surgery saved his leg but caused it to be 2 inches shorter than his right. Congress, in recognition of his valor, restored his rank and seniority.
Okay, but is Benedict an hero or a hormonal hurricane? One minute he's a battlefield badass refusing amputation like a legend. The next he's rage quitting Congress and holding grudges. I'd ask what time of the month it was, but honestly, I think every day was his time of the month.
Hmm. Well, it was that success at Saratoga that would convince the French to join the Americans. Now, understand, it wasn't that the French king believed the American cause. It was just that this was a good chance to bloody the nose of the British and humiliate an old foe of France. The French king might have hoped that he'd regain some land lost in the Seven Years' War as well. Now, had he known that this revolution would help inspire his own people to rise up, ultimately causing him to lose his head, he would likely have told the Americans to get bent.
So basically, the French were like, we don't love you. We just hate the British more. Classic toxic alliance. And if King Louis had gotten a peek at his own future, he'd have slammed the palace doors and yelled, Liberty, not my own monarchy.
Uh, the war seemed to be, for the first time, turning in the Americans' favor. When the British retreated from Philadelphia, Washington appointed Benedict Arnold military commander of the city. Many historians point to this as one of Washington's biggest mistakes of the war. Arnold was a fine battlefield commander, in fact, one of the best in the Continental Army, but he was no politician. And Philadelphia was a minefield of political divisions and needed someone with tact. Arnold took things too personally, and too often he got involved in disputes between the city's rival factions. He also had a little too much of that old New England capitalist in him. and started to get involved in some money making schemes that looked a lot like war profiteering. This marked the beginning of his downfall. The only thing that could make it worse was a femme fatale, and that was coming on the scene. Enter 18-year-old Peggy Shipton, the daughter of Edward Shipton, a British loyalist who had done business with the occupying British forces when they held the city. Peggy had also been courted by British Major John Andre. And Andre was not just a British officer, but served in the British intelligence service, training and recruiting spies. Even after the city was back in American hands, Peggy was able to communicate with Andre through the services of a Philadelphia merchant who could smuggle communications across enemy lines.
Here comes the love interest, and there goes the plot. I know I love to say that it's a guy thing all the time, but hey, we women have absolutely had our messy moments too. Equal rights means equal ability to derail everything.
The young, pretty Peggy caught Benedict's eye in 1778. He was 37, wounded, partially disabled, and bitter. She was 18, lively, intelligent, and returned the old man's interest. No one would ever really know if her interest in Arnold was genuine in the early stages or if she just saw the chance to get information to Andre. Peggy had more than her share of suitors, and it seemed to take a little while for her to warm up to the American general. After a few months, though, she and Benedict had become a regular thing. If her loyalist father disapproved of her running around with a rebel general, he never made it public. But he didn't stop the relationship. This has caused some to speculate that her father might have been in on the plot to turn Arnold. Peggy and Benedict were married in April of 1779. Adding to his frustration, he was brought up on charges of corruption. One of his schemes had angered the wrong man in Philadelphia, and it led to his conviction on minor charges. Congress had actually ordered Washington to bring the hammer down on his subordinate, but George cut Benedict a great deal of slack here. He was only given a light reprimand by Washington, but to Arnold, it was just one more betrayal. In his mind, he had given a wife, his leg for his country, and was only repaid by dishonor. Even before the court martial, he had entered into talks with the British.
Emotional much, Benny? Like, I gave you my leg, my wife, my everything, and this is how you repay me? Sir, you're either fighting for freedom or starring in a dramatic breakup monologue. Honestly, he went from battlefield MVP to nobody appreciates me real quick. I'd say take a nap and hydrate, but he skipped straight to treason instead.
Peggy was able to act as a go between Arnold and Andre. Her letters to Andre were the key. Between the lines of her benign prose were messages written between Benedict and Andre, and invisible ink was used so that anyone seeing the letters would only see friendly correspondence between two old friends. Now, that had to be a little awkward. Bad enough to introduce your husband to the guy you were engaged to before him, but at the same time, they're literally in opposing armies. On top of that, you're asking your husband to commit high treason by passing information on to your former beau, and you're passing information between your current husband and former beau in a bunch of very friendly letters to the latter.
This is full blown soap opera before soaps were even a thing. I would absolutely be on the couch with my snacks yelling, "Girl, what are you doing?" Peggy out here writing flirty espionage letters to her ex while her new husband plots national betrayal. Meanwhile, both men are armed, powerful, and on opposite sides of a literal war. Like, messy.
Hmm. Arnold's discussion with the British seemed to have started around May of 1779. The next year, he relayed news to the British of a planned American invasion of Canada. While this second invasion there was never carried out, it seemed to have given the British reason to trust the now false patriot. The correspondence carried on for months, during which time Benedict Arnold had been given command of the important fortifications at West Point, New York. This location was key to the defense of American positions. From here, the Americans could prevent the British from controlling the Hudson River. If West Point were to fall with the British and they controlled the Hudson, it would effectively allow them to cut the colonies in half, disrupting the movement of troops and supplies. The plot seemed to have two major components. First, Arnold would let things at West Point get lax. So lax that the fortifications were starting to fall apart. The large iron chain used to stop ships from sailing the Hudson was also in a serious case of disrepair. Second, Arnold had agreed to surrender the fort to the British. It's unlikely that he could just tell his men, when the British show up, just let them in the front door. So, by allowing the fort to fall apart, it would make surrender to the attacking British forces seem reasonable. In September 1780, Andre and Arnold set up a meeting. The HMS Vulture sailed the Hudson and set anchor about 6 miles from the American lines. Arnold told three soldiers that they needed to row out to the Vulture and pick up some important British intelligence. Now, understand, he's asking them to go in a rowboat to a British warship and, supposedly get like some papers or something. The three men were reluctant to simply row up to a British warship and ask for secret information. At first, Arnold threatened the men, then settled on a bribe of 50 pounds of flour.
They must like to bake.
His and cookies got him. The men might have been confused when they reached the Vulture to find Major Andre would be their cargo. I assume they thought Andre was going to give information to Arnold. No matter the case, they rowed Andre back to shore. Now, on the 22nd of September, Andre and Arnold met face to face to finalize the plans. Benedict agreed to surrender West Point for 20,000 pounds, a sizable fortune in the 1780s, worth tens of millions today. With the deal made, there was a question of how Andre was going to get past the American lines and back to British occupied New York. Returning to the Vulture was not an option. The ship had come under cannon fire from the Americans at Teller's Point, and after taking several direct hits, the Vulture was finally able to retreat downriver. This left Andre with only one option, and it was very risky.
Are we sure this is history and not a telenovela? I accidentally binge watched a while ago. Because if I didn't already know how it ends, I'd be on the edge of my seat, clutching a throw pillow and gasping every 5 minutes. Secret letters, ex lovers, treason. This plot is juicier than your smoked brisket.
Because of his rank, Major General, Arnold was in a position to give Andre a pass that would allow him to get past the American sentries. Under the name John Anderson and change into civilian clothes, Andre could ride to New York. He also carried 6 papers with him. The papers detail how the British should attack West Point. This hard evidence of Arnold's betrayal was stuffed into Andre's stocking. Dressed as a civilian, carrying the damning documents, meant that if captured, Andre could be arrested as a spy and would be afforded none of the customs of a captured officer. In fact, Andre would have every reason to believe that if captured, he would be tried and hanged as a spy. In fact, the British had greatly angered the Americans by hanging Nathan Hale, an American soldier and spy, in 1776. Hale, who reportedly said, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country," at the time of his execution. Spies were seen as illegal combatants, allowing their executions under the standard rules of warfare. But that didn't mean either side had to like it. Andre set out on the morning of September 23rd and was given an escort part way. Then he had to continue on his own. He had been warned to avoid the main road, but for some reason chose to ignore that warning and traveled the Albany Post Road. This would turn out to be a huge mistake. Near Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow, and yes, Sleepy Hollow is a real place name, he was stopped by three Americans, John Paulding, Isaac Van Wart, and David Williams. First, Andre would have been at ease because Paulding was wearing a Hessian army coat. What Andre didn't know and couldn't have known was that Paulding got the coat after escaping British captivity only a few days earlier. Andre even went as far as to ask the men which side they were on. But instead of simply asking, do you support the British or the colonials, he said, quote, I hope you belong to our party. And when they asked what party, he said the lower party, meaning the British who were in control of the lower part of the river. Blind or just confused by what all this meant, they responded that they were of that party, at which time Andre informed them that he was a British officer and could not be delayed in his return to New York, at which point they arrested Andre. It's debatable if the goal of this arrest was, to actually arrest Andre or to rob him. The revolutionary government of New York allowed them to keep anything they found on a loyalist. So robbing and searching were basically the same thing. Andre tried to change his story, now claiming to be an American officer and showing them the pass issued by Arnold. No matter, they told him to take off his boots. Even here, this was really just kind of dumb luck because only Paulding was the only one of the three who could read. When Andre offered to give the men his horse in return for his release, they refused and instead took him to Colonel John Jameson. Jameson, unsure what to make of everything, sent Andre back to Arnold, who was likely the nearest American general. But when Major Benjamin Talmadge, head of Colonial Army Intelligence, arrived, he was suspicious of Arnold's issuing the pass and sent men to go fetch Andre. Talmadge then sent the 6 pages Andre carried to Washington. He also chose to keep Arnold's name out of it for the time being. He was worried that accusing Arnold, if he turned out he was innocent, would harm his own career. So he elected to send a letter to Arnold informing him of Andre's capture. So they're literally sending the spy back to the guy he was spying with, but also sending a warning letter that they caught the spy. So it's not going to take a whole lot to figure out what Arnold's next move is. When Arnold received the letter, he was eating breakfast with his officers. He made some kind of excuse and went to his quarters. There, he and Peggy discussed what to do next. It was decided that Peggy would stay behind while Arnold headed off to meet up with the vulture. Likely, Peggy felt she'd be safe. As a woman in the 1780s, it would be easy for her to feign ignorance, and even if suspected, it's unlikely that an upper class woman, even a British loyalist, would be in too much danger.
Peggy's all, oh no, me? A part of the treasonous espionage plot? Why, I'm just a woman. I don't know anything about war and politics. But would you like a freshly baked treason cake with a side of plausible deniability?
You're not that far off the truth there. Just an hour after Arnold left West Point, Washington arrived for a scheduled inspection of the fort. Washington was pissed when he found the fort in such bad shape. He had not yet received the letters outlining the plot. He became even more angry when he found out that Arnold had left just prior to his arrival. Hours later, the letters finally found Washington. He quickly realized what was happening and sent men to capture Arnold. However, by that time, Arnold had already boarded the Vulture and was sailing to New York and British General Clinton. Andre was taken to Talmadge. The two spoke for some time. Talmadge wanted to get any information that Andre was willing to give. Andre, for his part, wasn't willing to give anything up. When the question came as to how he would be treated, things got a little cold. Talmadge had been a friend and classmate of Nathan Hale's at Yale. Talmadge told Arnold that he would likely get the same treatment as Nathan Hale had received. Peggy had been preparing for Washington's arrival when she learned of the capture of Major Andre. So she began to burn all the correspondence with Andre. When Washington arrived, she seemed to have a full on meltdown. She was talking crazy, saying that spirits had carried Benedict off through the roof. She was also wearing, quote, too little clothing to be seen by a gentleman. The crazy act fooled both Washington and his aide, Alexander Hamilton. Peggy claimed that people were out to kill her son, so Washington allowed her to travel with the infant to Philadelphia. Later in Philly, letters were uncovered showing her link to Andre. This led to her being banished from Pennsylvania. So instead of arresting her for espionage or treason or as a spy, they just said, you got to leave Philly. And in November, she and her child were allowed to join Benedict in New York.
Not only leave Billy, but here, go join your husband again.
Andre at trial claimed he had no intention of operating behind American lines. It was only because he had to meet with Arnold, something that rules of warfare allowed, that he was behind enemy lines in civilian clothing. It did little to sway the military tribunal, and he was sentenced to be hanged. Andre appealed to George Washington, asking to die by firing squad like a soldier. Washington refused, and on the 2nd of October, 1780, Andre was hung as a spy. His body was later returned to England, where it was buried in Westminster Abbey as an honored hero. Benedict Arnold was given a commission in the British Army as a brigadier general. Because of the failure of the plot, he was only paid a fraction of the £20,000 he was promised, about £6,500, still over 1 million in today's value. He led some British actions in Virginia and in his home of Connecticut. He had some temporary success in Virginia and even captured Richmond for a while, but ultimately had to retreat. Washington had given standing orders to hang Arnold if captured. After retreating from Virginia, he moved to Connecticut and burned much of New London. But as the war ended with the British surrender at Yorktown, Arnold was allowed to travel to England. In England, Arnold advised the king to keep fighting, but a new anti war Whig parliament voted to end the fighting. Criticism of Arnold crept up as people compared him to Andre. He struggled to find a place in British society. When the French Revolution broke out, he started up as a privateer and was actually captured by the French colonial authorities and accused of spying for the British and barely avoided being hanged. He was granted a sizable land grant in Canada and spent time traveling between there and London.
Wait, let me get this straight. Benedict betrays his country, flops in Britain, moonlights as a pirate, gets caught by the French, nearly hanged, and then somehow walks away with Canadian land grant. Benedict the musical, now featuring espionage, exile, and unexpected real estate deals.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Apparently, they just thought Canada was something they could just give to people at the time. By 1801, his health was getting bad. Gout, combined with his war wounds, were taking their toll. He was unable to walk without a cane and could no longer command ships. On the 14th of June, at age 60, he would pass away. A story spread that was as he was dying, he asked to be dressed in his American uniform and asked God to forgive him for ever wearing a different one. While the story might be made up for some dramatic spin, it does at least symbolize how his treason failed to gain him the rank and glory that he longed for. As for Peggy, after Benedict's death, she had to sell everything off to pay their debts. She died 2 years later at the age of 44, most likely from cancer. Benedict Arnold, a man who gave so much to his country only to betray it, was buried in England in a grand funeral, but with no military honors. This has been History is Criminal. Join Kimberly and I again next week as we look at Belle Gunness, the Indiana Ogress. That's a fun one. Until then, if you like what you heard, tell a friend. And if you don't like it, tell an enemy. Never suffer alone.